everybody, it's Chris, and I've been looking at the subclasses from the Apocalyptic Subclasses release from Wizards of the Coast. It's an Unearthed Arcana. There were 4 subclasses released with the Unearthed Arcana. Today we're going to look at the Defiled Sorcery Sorcerer, and this is my favorite of all 4 here. I think this one is really promising. In fact, it really doesn't need a whole lot done to it at this point. I think this is pretty good right out of the box. So let's go into it. I do have some criticisms, but they're mostly nitpicks. Siphon life into catastrophic spells. Your innate power siphons life essence from the surrounding world. At your command, creatures grow sick and plants wither to husks. You draw power from the corruption of life itself, draining vitality to fuel destructive magic. Now, I'm going to give my first criticism here, and probably my biggest criticism of the subclass, which isn't that big, but nevertheless. I love the way this sounds. The way these features work, I'm not sure it necessarily lines up exactly with what is promised here, because it talks about withering plants to husks and drawing power from it, also from creatures growing sick, but the plant stuff I don't really see in the features. Also, this is called Defiled Sorcery. Assume there's some kind of ability here with plants and withering them. It reminds me, reading this description, it reminds me of a prestige class that was from D&D 3.5, if I believe, and it was kind of the anti-druid that would kill plants instead of, helping and growing plants. Don't see a lot of plant stuff here. This is all about sucking the life energy out of creatures and using it for your spells, which is great. I don't mind that one bit. But when I read this description, it wasn't what I was expecting. So there's not that exact lineup there. If they wanted to have the features fit the description, there should probably be some ribbon in here somewhere or something added somewhere. And I have a few ideas where that could be, where plants are being withered. They do have one spell that can wither a plant, not necessarily something I would expect to do with my sorcerer. So that's my little tiny nitpick here, but let's look at the features and the mechanics. So we begin with level 3, Defile and Empower. It says, once per turn when you roll damage for a spell you cast using a spell slot, you can siphon your life energy into the spell and empower it. Roll a number of your unexpended hit point dice up to a number equal to half the level of the spell slot expended. Round up, minimum of 1 die. That means if we expend a first level spell slot to cast a first level spell, we can still use this and get 1 hit die out of that. Add the total rolled to 1 damage roll of the spell. Those hit point dice are then expended. I have some thoughts about the wording here. First thing I'm going to talk about is this wording right here. Half the level of the spell slot expended. So I appreciate the wording. I think in the old rules, this would have said half the level of the spell. Now, if I'm a sorcerer, and let's say I'm casting a 4th level chromatic orb, that is a 1st level spell, upcast to 4th level, and by the rules, it then becomes a 4th level spell. So this would do the same thing, either way it is written. The thing I like here is it takes out that knowledge of the rules being necessary. Inevitably, you're going to have a DM or a player who doesn't realize that upcasting a 4th or a 1st level spell to 4th level makes it a 4th level spell. By saying half the level of the spell slot expended, that's clear. Absolutely clear. Of course, the other reason to do this is to make sure that if you have a character who can cast spells without expending a spell slot, maybe they have a wand, or they're using a scroll, or they have a feat that gives a free casting, or something like that, then you can use this feature with that. So, smart wording. The next thing I want to talk about is how certain kinds of spells are played at different tables, because it says, once per turn when you roll damage for a spell you cast using a spell slot. Notice it doesn't say that that spell has to be cast that turn. It could be cast whenever. It's just once per turn when you roll the damage for a spell that you cast with a spell slot. Now, there's a lot of spells that you can cast, including sorcerer spells, where you roll damage multiple times. One example for a sorcerer would be Cloud of Daggers. So you cast Cloud of Daggers, and creatures take damage right away when you cast it, any that are in the area. Then any creatures that end their turn in the area are also going to take damage. Any creatures that enter the area are also going to take damage. And so Cloud of Daggers might do damage several times each round. I have seen DMs run these kinds of spells in different ways. One way I've seen, this isn't all that common, but I have seen it, is where a DM will have you roll the damage for the spell when you cast it, and that's the damage. So if I cast Cloud of Daggers and I roll a 10 for the damage, that Cloud of Daggers casting does 10 points of damage this round, next round, however long it lasts. Another way I've seen, and this is the way I do it, is I will have them roll the damage, and then on their following turn, I will have them roll the damage again, and I will just reuse that damage roll until their following turn. So they're only rolling damage on their turn. And the reason I do this is it speeds up play. I'm not constantly going back to a player whose turn it isn't to have them make a roll, and that would slow things down. So I have them roll, and then the next turn that they have, they roll again. And so if they roll 10, that 10 lasts until the start of their next turn. Then they move their Cloud of Daggers over somewhere else. They roll the damage, and now they have a 12, and that 12 will last until their next turn. And then there are DMs who will have you roll every single time the spell delivers damage. And I think that's the proper way within the rules. I believe the way the rules are written, you are supposed to roll damage every single time the spell does damage. It just slows things down. That's why a lot of DMs don't run it that way. Depending how you run it, this changes the power level of this feature a lot. If I roll the damage once, then I can use this feature, and then that damage is getting added all the way through. The thing could deliver damage 30 times, and they're going to get 30 bonuses to damage. If I'm rolling once on my turn during the round, then I'm expending this once per round if I want to keep applying it. But if I'm rolling damage every single time, which again is the way I think it's supposed to work within the rules, then this expends a lot of hit dice if I want to keep applying it. And the thing is, I'm thinking myself as a DM, if I want to keep running these spells the way I normally do, I can't really do that with this. So I'm wondering whether instead of once per turn when you roll damage for a spell, there should be something in there that limits it to once per casting of a spell or something like that. Otherwise, it's going to affect the way that some of us run the game. That said, love the feature. I love the idea of drawing from your own life energy to improve the power of your spells. That is great. Then we have Life Steal. It says, instead of drawing on your own life force when you use this feature, you can try to steal the life from another creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself. It doesn't say an enemy. It says another creature. That means this could be an ally. That creature makes a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC. Creatures that have immunity to the exhaustion condition automatically succeed on the save. On a failed save, in place of rolling your hit point dice, roll a number of the creature's unexpended hit point dice up to a number of equal, same mechanics as if you took it from yourself. You then add that total to one damage roll of the spell, and those hit point dice are expended for the creature. Once a creature fails its save against Lifesteal, you can't use Lifesteal again until you finish a long rest, unless you expend 3 sorcery points. No action required to restore use of it. So it's pretty expensive to use again. 3 sorcery points is no joke. That's all your sorcery points at 3rd level. That said, pretty cool. And you don't have to worry about creatures constantly making their saving throw because, once again, you can take it from an ally. In fact, if I was going to take it from an ally, the first ally I'd be looking at is the Party Barbarian. Because if the Party Barbarian is targeted with this, they can choose to fail their saving throw. They don't really suffer any immediate effect. They lose some hit dice that they might have used in the next short rest, but as long as we find another way to heal them, then they don't suffer really from choosing to fail at all. And then I'm adding D12s instead of the D6s I would be using my own hit point dice. So we have the ability to add even more to the damage of the spell. But if the barbarian chooses to fail their saving throw, here we are at the point where this is now expended. And if I want to use it again, it's very expensive. I like this whole feature. I think it's very cool. There are some tweaks I'd love to see. I'd love to see something where this takes into account the different ways that DMs roll damage for these kinds of spells. Otherwise, it's going to be wildly different in power level depending on how they run it. Other than that, I think I'm pretty good with this. I did think about, as I was reading this, should lifesteal be limited to enemies? Because right now, like I said, you can do it on allies. If you don't want to do it on a party member, it could be a familiar. Familiars have hit dice, right? And you steal their hit point dice. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I'm not sure I've got a problem with this working on allies. I think that's cool. And if I'm using a high-level spell slot, that's when I'd want to use lifesteal. And then, like I said, take the barbarian's hit point dice. Or if there is no barbarian in your party, then the fighters or the paladins. You can still get D10s pretty easily. Somebody in your party probably has D10 hit point dice. And you could add a lot of damage to a high-level spell slot spell. So I think this is very cool. I like it a lot. Like I said, there's a few things I would like clarified. Though, like I said, I think I know how the rules are supposed to work. So if I wanted to continue as a DM to use my method of once per round rolling damage instead of every single instance of damage, then I think I would just have to come up with a method to make this work with that. That could either be written in by the designers or I could come up with something myself because my method of rolling damage is probably a house rule anyways, so it's just about refining the house rule. Now, if we do use the ability on an enemy, I will point out there is a design note here, hit point dice. Monsters, like player characters, have hit point dice. You'll see it on their stat block. I will point out that, some summoned creatures don't have hit point dice, so if you cast summon, undead or something like that, that creature doesn't have hit point dice. But if you are fighting a monster, it has hit point dice. If you look at a monster stat block, you're going to find that the hit point dice are right there. Any creature, both characters and monsters, can expend hit dice during a short rest to regain hit points. When a monster is first encountered, assume it hasn't expended any of its hit dice. So it's just letting you know that if the player tries to use this on an enemy, that enemy should still have its hit dice available. Now, I will point out, though, you won't necessarily know what the hit dice are of a monster. So it might have D4s or it might have D12s. And so you're kind of gambling in that regard. Then we have an expanded spell list. At level 3, we get Blindness, Deafness, Inflict Wounds, Ray of Enfeeblement, and Ray of Sickness. At level 5, Bestow Curse and Vampiric Touch. Level 7 is Blight and Hallucinatory Terrain. Level 9 is Anti-Life Shell and Contagion. So this thematically is perfection. All these spells, I understand why they are on the Defiled Sorcerer. Won't say this is a great spell list because a lot of these kinds of spells are not mechanically strong. An example would be Blight. Blight is mechanically weak for its level. I will also point out Blight is the only way that a Defiled Sorcerer that I can see amongst the subclass features can do anything to plants. And like I said, I wouldn't mind if there was some kind of way to have them wither plants and gain life energy from them. Blight doesn't do that. It just withers the plants. But yeah, this is the perfect list for this subclass. Not super mechanically strong. Then we are going to go to our level 6 features. So at level 3, I think this is a strong subclass, by the way. Corrupted Caster. You learn further ways to tap into the corrupting magic within yourself, granting you the following benefits. You get Defiler's Ward. When you take a bonus action to transform sorcery points into a spell slot, so that's using Font of Magic, you can wreathe your body in a protective web of defiling energy. Roll a number of d6s equal to the level of the spell slot created. You gain temporary hit points equal to the total rolled. If a creature hits you with a melee attack roll while you have temporary hit points, the creature takes necrotic or poison damage, your choice, equal to your charisma modifier. And Strength and Rot, Damage dealt by your sorcerer spells and sorcerer features ignores resistance to necrotic and poison damage. So the first thing I'm going to just point out is that Defiler's Ward isn't limited in number of uses other than the number of sorcery points you're willing to expand to create spell slots with. That said, you should be able to expand some sorcery points to create spell slots and get your Defiler's Ward. It's not necessarily something I'd always do with a sorcerer, but if I was playing this kind of sorcerer, then I would. And then I would get my Defiler's Ward. And obviously, the greater level of spell slot you create, the more d6s you're going to get. The more d6s you get, the more temporary hit points you have. And not only that, the less likely you'll lose all your temporary hit points when you're hit. Thus, the more times you'll be able to have creatures take the damage when they hit you with a melee attack roll. This does necrotic or poison damage. Thank goodness it doesn't just do poison damage, because there's a lot of creatures in the game that are straight out immune to poison. It's not like I could say about a fifth of the creatures are immune to poison, but you can't come to the conclusion that means 80% of the time this will work. Like, I'm in a campaign right now where we are regularly coming up against demons. That's just the flavor of the campaign. So all demons are immune to poison. So if I had a feature that only did poison damage, I might as well not have the feature. So having that selection is good. And I note here it says that it ignores resistance to necrotic and poison damage. For necrotic, that's important. For poison, that's basically useless. When I see a feature like the Poisoner Feat that removes the resistance to poison damage, I think that is not great, because it convinces a player that it's going to make poison damage more reliable, but it really doesn't, because almost no creatures are resistant to poison, so it almost does nothing. Creatures tend to be just straight out immune. If that was just ignoring resistance to poison damage, I'd not be happy with that. But because necrotic is there, that's still a good feature. Just ignore the fact that it ignores resistance to poison damage, because there is a minute number of creatures that are actually resistant to poison damage. And you pretty much always want to choose necrotic damage. I can't think of a creature off the top of my head that is immune to necrotic and not immune to poison. Can't think of a single one. There probably is one somewhere, but none that come to mind. And I like this feature. I think this is where, though, they could throw in a ribbon. I think what they should do is they should say, when you take a bonus action to transform sorcery points into a spell slot, you can wreathe your body in a protective web of defiling energy, and then throw in something there where plants around you wither and die. And then it would fit that thematics of destroying the plants around you. This is where it would fit in just so nicely. That's just a thought I had. This is still a good feature as written, I think. Then we have Withering Aura. And it says, when you use your innate sorcery is your first level feature that's going to give you advantage on your attack rolls with your sorcerer spells, as well as a +1 DC. And by 14th level, you will use it in every combat. Because even if you run out of uses, you can expend sorcery points to reuse it, which you will do. So you will have innate sorcery all the time. An aura of defiling magic fills a 15-foot emanation originating from you while your innate sorcery is active, granting you the following additional benefits. This is the other place where if they wanted to put in the withering of plants, they could have your 15-foot emanation wither plants in the area. And again, that's just a ribbon. It doesn't affect the power level of this subclass at all. I like the description, and I'd like it if the features fulfilled that description. Defiling Shroud. When an enemy within the aura hits you with an attack roll, you can reduce that attack's total damage against you. The reduction equals your charisma modifier. I'll come back to this. As in Siphon, when an enemy dies within the aura, you regain 1d4 sorcery points. Once you use this benefit, you can't regain sorcery points in this way again until you use innate sorcery again, which will be the very next combat. I love this. First off, thematically, I think it's very cool. Like I said, it could wither plants, and I think that'd make it even cooler. But I like this idea of this emanation of defiling magic around you. I like the ability that we get a defensive ability. That's great. So we got a defensive ability that's going to reduce the damage we take. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what if, and I know this isn't what you would first think of with a 14th level sorcerer, but what if we had the heavy armor master feat? Because that also reduces damage, except by your proficiency bonus. It's only bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. But you could do it, right, with a multi-class. You could do that. Paladin sorcerer that's wearing heavy armor with heavy armor master. This would stack. This would stack with that. So you'd be reducing, if it was bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, you would reduce it by your charisma modifier and your proficiency bonus, which at this level be 10 points, right? You just take 10 points off the damage. Be very nice. And I will point that the enemy that hits you has to be within your 15-foot aura. So you have to be close to your enemy for you to get this benefit. And then Essence Siphon. When an enemy dies within the aura, you regain the D4 sorcery hit points. D4 sorcery hit points is a lot. We have 14 total sorcery points at 14th level, and we can expend them very, very quickly. And it's not easy to get sorcery points back. Here we're saying every time we use an 8 sorcery, we can get sorcery points back. Like I said, we should be using an 8 sorcery in every combat. In fact, if we have to expend sorcery points to use an 8 sorcery again, as long as we get Essence Siphon happening at least once, on average, we will recover more sorcery points than we expended to use an 8 sorcery. That's a great deal. This is good. This is good and cool, and both of these require that you get close to your enemies. 15-foot emanations are something we are very familiar with because that's Spirit Guardians, right? So we've all played with Spirit Guardians. If you've played D&D over the last 10 years, probably you've played with Spirit Guardians once or twice. And so you should be familiar with 15-foot emanations. You know how big they are or how big they aren't. You got to get close. And sorcerers that are 14th level that focus on blasting generally don't want to get close. So this is a little bit counter to what you would normally want to do with a sorcerer, and that's why I like it, because I like features that are good but make you think about how to play the character differently than any other run-of-the-mill sorcerer. This is a sorcerer now that I want to get close to the enemies, and that makes me think differently about how I might build my character and how I might play it tactically than any other sorcerer. And that's great. I love to see that because I want subclasses to be very different from each other. It's a withering aura. Let's have it wither some stuff, I guess. That's, again, my nitpick. But let's move on to level 18 and Superior Defiler. That says you perfected your ability to control and channel defiling magic, granting you the following benefits. Fouled Soul, you have immunity to the poisoned and exhaustion conditions. And Furthered Defilement, the size of your withering aura increases to a 30-foot emanation. In addition, enemies can't regain hit points while in your aura. Okay, so Fouled Soul, immunity to the poison condition is not a big deal by 18th level. Hero's Feast, if you're using it. Now, it's expensive to use Hero's Feast, and you're not casting it as a sorcerer, but if somebody in your party is using it when you're in those big, bad situations, you will have immunity to the poison condition. But immunity to exhaustion, that's very rare. Unless you're using some kind of polymorph or shape change that gives you stat blocks that would have immunity to exhaustion, you don't normally have immunity to exhaustion as a player character. Now, exhaustion doesn't happen that often. So this might not come up very often, but it is cool to have a feature that normally you can't get. And then Further Defilement, we've doubled the size of our emanation. So now we don't have to get in quite as close. Though, if I'm playing a blaster sorcerer, I'm usually further than 30 feet. So I'm still getting in closer. But it'd be nice to have that 30-foot emanation. So if you have a bunch of enemies you're fighting, and they're attacking you, that damage reduction you're getting is going to affect a lot more of them than it would with the 15-foot aura. So I think that's a significant power boost for that ability. And enemies not regaining hit points in that aura, again, depends, because not all enemies regain hit points, but some do through regeneration and that kind of thing, and this would prevent that. Now, I love this subclass, and I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up. Now, I have given some criticism during this video simply because I read the subclass and I thought, well, I love this whole thing, and then I started to think, okay, I need to come up with, this is an Unearthed Arcana, they're looking for feedback. So I looked a lot harder to find things to criticize here, and so I did in this video. But make no mistake, I think this is great design. And I think the designers did a fantastic job here. So well done. Well done for this. I'm so excited to play one of these. And that only leaves one more, and that's our Warlock. And that is coming on Friday. I hope you will join me for that. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.